Next we have Katie, who's passionate about all things Android, and she's been part of some truly exciting projects across the live event, media, and travel industries. Please join me in welcoming Katie Barnett, a Google developer expert for Android, one of the organizers of GDG Melbourne, and a Women Techmakers Ambassador. Katie is incredibly active in the development community, often running events, speaking on technical and non-technical topics, and writing blog posts to share her experience. Today, she's here to talk about something that's making a major comeback, Android widgets. Let's give her a round of applause.
Thank you. All right, switch it across. There we go. It's all good now. All right. Today I'm going to talk about how widgets are so hot right now. So first up, what is a widget? If you are new to widgets, you might be new to Android or be using another platform out there, widgets might be a new thing to you. Widgets are a small little application that's sitting right on your home screen. You can see information at a glance, and it gives you that customization of the home screen. So you can put what you want where you want and make it the size that you want. It shows the up-to-date information. So you can see what's most important to you, what you want to know frequently, and you want to know every time you unlock your phone. There are lots of different types of widgets that you might need to think about if you want to start building them. Informational widgets, so these are the ones that have crucial information, track how information changes. Could be something like your weather, which I'm sure we all have on our devices, even something like sports score tracking. Generally, you tap to open more detail. And then there's collection widgets. So this is displaying multiple elements. This could be like your calendar events, your emails, news app, that sort of thing. You've generally browsed through it. You might open a few of those sub-articles. Control widgets. So if you've got a smartphone and you've got lots of lights and things like that, even your music player on your phone, this is a sort of control widget where you can start and stop different things, change different system settings. And there's hybrid widgets, where you've got a bunch of all these different things together. And I sort of question, if you're going to create one of these hybrid widgets, are you really creating a whole app on the home screen? Is that exactly what you want to do? And I would kind of say, if you're going to start creating widgets that have a lot of different things, maybe think about creating multiple widgets so that people can add what they want and what's important to them on their screen in the right configuration, rather than giving them one that does everything, because then they may as well just open up the app. So if we're looking at widgets, what sort of things do we want to think about? They're the teaser for your app. Just like a movie, you need a teaser. It's the information snack where your app is the meal. You want to make sure that you're showing more detail in the actual app than you are in the widget. You want to give people a reason to open the full app. You can provide navigation links to frequently used parts of your app. So you can skip over things like the startup screen. You can go deep into a deep link directly into a part of your app rather than somebody having to go through several steps. You also can make sure your widget is resizable and make sure it's responsive to those sizes. So in this example here, we've got some weather widgets. In that small square one, we're just showing the current temperature, and that's all we need to know. Whereas in that portrait version, we've got the temperature over the week. And in the horizontal version, we've got the temperature over the day. So we're showing different amounts of information. It's actually the same widget, just depending on the size that the user selects. And the user can decide what is important to them. They could even have multiple ones of these displayed on the same screen if they want to. So when we're thinking about widgets, there are a lot of limitations. They must coexist with the home screen navigation. So it means that the only gestures you have are touch and vertical swipe. So you can't long press, because that might change the widget or move it around. You can't horizontally swipe, because you're going to swipe between different home screens. And there's a lot of other ones you can't use. So it's really just touch and vertical swipe. We also have limited available UI elements. And this is for an important reason. I'll talk about this in a moment. Also, the update frequency is something we need to consider. The simple way to have widgets update, the minimum time is every 30 minutes, which might be surprising. If you're using Work Manager, which I'll go a little bit into as well later, The minimum there is 15 minutes. And you might think, but I really want like my widget to update every minute. You know, I need to know the current temperature at all times. But of course, that will drain your battery. So we need to make sure that we have a really nice balance between the recency and detail of the information and the how much battery it's using. You can go more frequent, but it's a lot more complex. You need to look at things like alarm services, and yeah, it's, I don't think, really worth it. If you're doing that, you might not want to think how your widget works in a different way. Because otherwise the user's battery will just drain because they're finding exactly that it's now 14 degrees, not 13, for example. So why am I saying widgets are hot? Well, there's another platform out there, and they've just discovered widgets, whereas those of us who have been using Android have had widgets for over 10 years. So for us, it's old hat. I've had widgets ever since my first Android phone, which, yes, was well over 10 years ago. But now, because the other platform has widgets, suddenly, oh, what? There's this wonderful thing called widgets. Let's dedicate some time to do this in production apps. So we actually now need to start thinking about it. But of course, because we've had this for so long on Android, it's a lot easier for us. We've already got all the infrastructure in place. It's a new thing for those other developers. So we want to make sure that ours are better and our Android widgets are used a lot more. So why am I into widgets particularly? Well, I came up with an idea. Well, it wasn't necessarily me. It was me and a colleague. I don't actually know who came up with it first. We had this idea for a little app, and we thought, oh, it's going to be super easy, 10 hours of work, it'll be done, no problem. It's called Payday, and what it does is it has, you can put in your hourly rate. I do not earn $1 million a year. I wish I did, but let's pretend. You can put in your hourly rate, or your daily rate, or your yearly rate, and then it will tell you how far you're going through the day, like how much you're earning. Just purely based on the time of the day and how far you are through the day. It can motivate you, like, you know, I earned a lot of money today, this is great. If you're an individual contractor, this could be something quite fun for you. So we decided we're going to make this app, and I thought it would be really cool with widgets, because you want to have that on your home screen. It's not something you want to go and look in an app all the time, but on your home screen, it'd be kind of cool to say, I'm 80% through my day today, or I've earned $15,000 this month, that's great. So yeah, I thought it'd be a great app for widgets. It was going to be easy and quick, and then I started looking into widgets and discovered it's not so quick, but I got really deep into it, which is why I wrote this talk. But this is why I've been playing a lot with widgets. I actually did ship this app last night. It's taken longer because I got involved writing the talk, and it is actually now live, so I'm very excited. Hopefully someday someone will use it. So how do we go about building widgets? There's quite a few things we need to think about. There's a lot we need to unpack. So I'm going to talk about the UI, the part that we need. We need to make widgets work in general. We need data and updating. And we need our theming. I've broken off the theming separately to the UI. I'll go through why a bit later. But let's first look at UI in general. This part is pretty straightforward. But if we think about the past, we were using widgets with views. So this used the non-Jetpack Compose way of building widgets and the old remote views system. And if you've ever played with widgets before or played with remote views, you know it can be quite tricky. It's really limited. So we have these limited UI components, and it's because they want it to be really performant on the user's device for simple updating, things like that, but you don't have all the things you're used to. One recommendation is if you're starting with Jetpack Compose widgets, is come back and look at the views documentation, because a lot of the documentation is still relevant. The UI part is not, but all the data and updating parts are, and they haven't put that in the new section. For example, this diagram is super useful. It comes from the view-based system, but a lot of it's still relevant. So it takes us through what we're going to talk about in this talk. So I just kind of have to remove this section because this is talking about the old remote views. So right now, how do we build widgets? We build them with Glance. So this is the declarative UI way of building widgets. So we can use composables just like Jetpack Compose. It's really efficient. It's got all the same things you're used to with Jetpack Compose, like recomposition, optimized for small screens, all that sort of thing. It's compatible all the way back to 12 and earlier versions. Really simple, minimal code required. You can match your app branding and home screen wallpaper style, which is really cool. And it integrates really well with your existing application. So you're going to be using the same sorts of architecture that you're used to. So if we want to build some UI with Glance, we need our dependencies. So we've got specific dependencies for Glance. It uses remote views under the hood. So this is why we end up with limited components, because they're relying on remote views also having that component. So that subset of components can be quite tricky. Also with previews, there's a bit of a limitation with previews as well. You don't have all the features that you currently have in Jetpack Compose previews. I am hoping they add more because there's really no reason why there should be a limitation there. But hopefully that comes soon. But what we need to do to build the UI with Glance, and just by the way, I'm going to be putting a lot of code up on the screen. I will have a link for my slides later on if you want to grab that. So if I have this widget, all I need to do is have the widget and give it a Glance app widget. And it's becoming a Glance app widget object. We have a function provide Glance. So here's where I would do some data loading if it's not going to be computationally heavy. And then provide content. And this is just the same as we would with Jetpack Compose. We're going to put our UI here. You can create other composables, call them here, use your theme, everything you're used to. And this is just composables. So we can see here in this composable, I'm passing in some arguments. I've got a box, I've got an image, there's a modifier, all looks pretty good. But nothing is exactly the same. Modifier is now Glance modifier. We can see this here. And by the way, Glance versus Glance modifier, I use them interchangeably. So this is a bit different. And you might think, oh, that's all right, I'll just use that. The trouble is that not everything is available to you just like it is in regular Jetpack Compose modifier. So that's a bit of a trap. Looking at some more parts of my UI, color is now color provider, which again is a little tricky, so you have to do a little bit of fancy footwork to make that work. Simple things like text have a lot fewer options than there are in Jetpack Compose. And the arguments are named differently, which is a little bit annoying, so you just have to get used to using it. For example, there's no way of using custom fonts. So when I have here an example, this is from my app here. I had a nice little custom font, but my actual widget, I had to use boring old Roboto. So there might be ways around this. I haven't yet found that. But it is kind of frustrating that you can't have it look exactly the same as your app. So my most common frustrations with Glance that took me a long time to get over, and it still had problems, is I wanted to reuse my app UI. I wanted it to look the same. They look basically the same. Can't I just reuse everything? And I can't. No, you can't do it. You will get these fun errors, like this one here, which is actual type is Glance modifier, but modifier was expected. And you read that and you think, but I've passed it Glance modifier. I've done everything I think. But what that is you're trying to use a regular Jetpack Compose component, not the Glance component. You get this other error. This usually appears when you're trying to got your previews, and you get like class cast exceptions, and they're very confusing to understand. I even was trying to make a little tweak last night to my app and came across this and spent ages trying to work out what it was. I used a Glance thing instead of a Jetpack Compose thing. It was confusing. And what this is because of all these imports. If we look here in my widget, it's all Glance imports. In my app, it's all Compose imports. They may look the same. You might think to yourself, we've got box, column, row in both. They just don't exist. Flow row doesn't exist in Glance, which is really irritating. So you sort of have to be a bit clever. One of the things that doesn't exist, which is annoying, is in Compose we've got card, which you think is a pretty straightforward composable. No, that doesn't exist in Glance, which is really frustrating. Yeah, they just don't exist. So you can't use a lot of these modifiers. Text, you can't get on text layout. A whole bunch of different stuff, which you have to work your way around. So if we've done the UI and got over that little hump, and we know that Glance is a bit different, we've done that, we need to do making widgets work. We need to actually make sure that our operating system knows there's a widget there. So how do we do this? So in my little diagram here, we're going to talk about the Android manifest. We've got these little bits in the middle here, app widget provider. That's what we're going to use. I've replaced my UI by Jetpack Compose and Glance app widget. I'm going to use a Glance app widget receiver instead of the old broadcast receiver. So we can move through this. And then we're going to talk about updating a little bit later as well. So I need to make sure the operating system knows that a widget is available. And I use an XML file here with an app widget provider. So this, we declare all the information we need. So we have an initial layout, and you can use the default ones, which is just a loading wheel, but you could provide something useful for your users. A description, so when you're showing this to the user, they know what this widget does. A preview image, letting you know what the widget's going to look like. You can also add your resize mode, so whether the widget can resize, in which orientations, and also the target cell width and height. The widget can be resized within that, but you want to say, this is the best way that my widget's going to display. My examples here, 2x2 and 4x1 are the ones that I've targeted for. You can also make your widget reconfigurable. So this is when you long press on a widget and you might want to go and change the data source. Maybe change that city if you're doing a weather-based widget, or in my case, change an hourly rate, something like that. So I'll talk a bit about that configuration. You can also put the update period here. This is the simple one that's a minimum of 30 minutes. This one will just run the update code every 30 minutes. If you want to be more frequent than that, you need to go with a coroutine worker. So once we've got that in there, we then need our widget receiver. So this is using the Glance app widget receiver, and this can be as simple as just these few lines. This is just telling me that I've got the widget receiver. This is the widget I want to display every time this widget is called. We then declare this in the manifest so we know where to find it. So we can see in here that we've provided our widget info. We've got the app widget updates. Every time an update happens, we're going to use this. And then we've got our metadata with that app widget info resource. So we've linked those things together, and those things are what is required to make the widget appear on the operating system. Now, with our Glance app widget receiver, we can go a bit more complex. So if we want to know when different things happen with our widgets. So we can hook into where the first instance is added and when the last instance is removed. And this is really important if you've got some long-running data refreshing. You want to make sure when the last widget is removed that you actually stop this so that the user isn't doing these data fetches for no reason. We also have, every time a new instance of the widget is added, so you might want to subscribe to some different workers so that you can make sure you're updating that new widget. You can queue those data updates. Also, you might want to do something every time the widget size is updated. Usually you can handle the resizing just using normal Jetpack Compose functionality, but sometimes you might want to add or remove data and you can change some things there. I have simplified this a little bit more. There is a little bit more you need in this section. I'm going to write a future blog post on it because it was quite the discoverable exercise for me as it is not documented. You also need to consider handling errors. So what happens when something goes wrong? We have recoverable errors. This is just the same as regular Jetpack Compose. You don't have the data you want. You can show a nice error screen to the user. It's all good. Give them a way to refresh, or tell them to re-add the widget if that's the easiest way out of the problem. There's also unrecoverable errors. So this is when there's a problem with the compose itself. So you've put some bad code in there that for some reason doesn't compose. The widget itself doesn't show anything. You can also have an error UI layout for when everything goes completely wrong. This can be handy if you have a widget and then you update the app and delete the whole widget or change the package name. Suddenly your widgets just die. So you want to actually show the user, please re-add this widget, or something like that. So you can provide a simple XML for that. So we've got widgets appearing on our operating system. What's next? Data and updating. Widget configuration is important. As I mentioned, you want to be able to tell the widget what sort of data to use. You might want to launch an activity to enable the user to select that data. So that's as simple as creating that activity. This one is going to be, in my case, widget configuration activity. It's going to have an intent filter there, app widget configure, so that we know what it's for. And then our provider XML, we're going to add this reference to this activity. So that means every time I add the widget, it will show the configuration activity. You can also add widget features reconfigurable so that every time you edit the widget, it will also launch that activity. That's that little pencil that appears there. You can also add configuration optional, which means it will only do this on edit only. And you can also remove these entirely. If your widget doesn't require any extra data sources or extra configuration, if it just shows the same thing no matter what. So widget data and state. So when the state of the data changes, it's the app's responsibility to update the widget. The widget is pretty dumb. It doesn't do much itself. The app itself needs to think about it. So we can do things like this in our app. We can call our widget function. We can call update all with a context. We can update conditionally depending on different states. And that will go through all the widgets of that type and do an update. It'll let them call their own update functions, but we need to trigger it from the app itself. If you're with state for widgets, there's a basic version, and that's to use the preferences data store. So we can use update widget state here. We can see we've got prefs. We're passing in keys and values as strings, and it's pretty straightforward. When we're passing this into the glance, into our glance widget, we can grab the current state, use our key, and get our string value. And then you can transform it to an integer, can transform it to a JSON object, or whatever you feel like. That's pretty straightforward if your data is fairly small and easy to serialize or easy, to manage. This uses preferences data store under the hood. It uses preferences glance state definition class. It's pretty easy to do, and I would really recommend stay with this if you can. I decided that I wanted to try the advanced version, which is using a custom glance state definition. Another thing which is not documented, I need to write this one up as well. This one can be any sort of storage. It can be a room database, can be a data store of any other type, and it's a serialized data type. So this is when you can provide a custom object. It requires a lot more fancy footwork and a lot more work to make this happen. I would recommend stay with the basic version if you can. It gets complex. So you want to update the widget on things like data save, data delete, app open, periodically, depending on what you want to do. So if the user's making changes, make sure you let the widget know to update. So if we want to set the state, an example of this, for the immediate update, for an example, is in the configuration activity. So I've got a function that's going to set my widget data. We need to grab the glance widget manager, get the glance ID. There's a sort of a dual ID system. There's the app widget ID itself and then the glance ID. I don't know why. Then we update our state with that key value pair system I showed earlier. Then I need to call that update so the widget knows to go and make that update. I then, if I'm using my configuration activity, need to say, this activity is done, let's finish this. We've done what we need to do, the result's okay. We've passed through the configuration, so it knows to notify the widget that that configuration is done. If we want to do a periodic update, we can use a coroutine worker. And this is the one that would allow us to go to every 15 minutes. So this is where we're using that coroutine worker. We've got some dependency injection, which is really handy. If you're not using this version, you don't get dependency injection. You have to do it all in your widget class. But in the coroutine worker, we can offset everything to the IO thread. We can make sure we're not locking up the UI. We can do our longer running operations. So we need to specify the unique work name. In this case, I'm just saying I want all my widgets of this type to update at the same time. But you can add different unique values here if you want your widgets to have their own workers, so they update at different times, depending on what your kind of application is. We can enqueue our data. So here we manage our work policies. I won't go into detail, but we can talk about how we want it to update or keep the current policy, if we want to force an update. And I've got my duration there of 15 minutes. And that's the minimum that coroutine worker will go. Yeah, it's too complex to go more frequent. And we need to make sure we clean up this when done. And this is what I called from our widget receiver. We want to make sure we cancel any remaining workers once we remove all the widgets. So when we're doing the work itself, we want to fetch the current state and update it with new data. So again, I'm using that Glance App Widget Manager, got all that information, go through all the widgets that are associated with this type of widget and update their states. So go get my data from my rate repository in this case, and then pass that through to the string value pairs. Then update all of them at once. Then I can handle any errors that might have occurred, show my fancy error screen, update with an error state, that sort of thing. I can also have got a back-off situation here so that I can retry if this was like a network request or something like that. But you can manage this just as you would for any other kind of long-running data in your application. So if we have our data happening, we might want to provide our user a way of refreshing that data or interacting with our widget. There's some easy things, it's just to load an app activity. So in this case, all we need to do is create a clickable, and we have this function, action start activity, that's available to us. And what this does is just starts any activity. Pretty straightforward, so it can just open your app from the start. And that's what most widgets do, they will just open the main app. You can also pass in some various parameters if you want. So if you want it to go to a specific deep link or pass in some specific data, you can do that. We also have things like buttons where we can start a particular service. This one we've called it sync service, so you can just start that service. We also have, we can run a Lambda just in our Glance Jetpack Compose code. So we might want to update the widget state. In this case, I've sort of put it into the dispatches IO thread. But you wouldn't want to run super long running code here. But you could do some small things if you wanted to. We can also create an action run callback, which gives us a bit more features, but again, we can offload something to a background thread and just call this through our code. So that's pretty straightforward. The user interaction's not too hard. So we've got data and updating, all right. Now theming. This is where it gets a little bit interesting. So we have Glance theme, and this is just like the material theme, except it's really only for the color, which is surprising. I'm sure they will update it in the future. You need to just have like your other top level variables for typography and dimensions and all those sorts of things. It still feels like it's in development. So all the colors, as I mentioned before, use color providers. So we can create a color scheme, and we've got our colors, and we can pass our material 3 colors into this, which makes it pretty easy. It means you can have the same colors for your widgets as you do for your app. So with my material theme, you can see that pretty straightforward. I get the colors I want in the light and the dark schemes. So if I want to set these colors, I just have to pass it into my Glance theme, and we're all pretty good, pretty straightforward. And then I can use it just like a material theme, using glance theme.colors.background, for example. But what if I want to blend it in with my wallpaper? If I had this nice purple background and I put these green on top, it's going to look pretty ugly. And you can't control what colours the user has on their device, what their styling is, whether they want something nice and minimal or whether they want bright colours everywhere. So you want to make sure that it looks nice for them. So on supported devices, I think it's Android 12 and above, you can use the device theme, and that's just the actual wallpaper colours, but also those colours you can select to make everything match nicely. That will set those themed app icons at the bottom there. So what we can do is when we're setting up our Glance theme, we can add a check to if the colours are supported, we can pass in Glance theme colours. And that will use the system default colours, which the user can control on the supported devices. If they don't have access to that, we can let them use the regular colours. And you could pass in a variable as well to give the user a choice, so that when they're configuring their widget, they can say, use my colours or use themed colours, if they want to. So you can pass that in and you can set the colours there. And that will let you match with the app icons. Again, not documented, but I had to go and find which were the right colours to match with the app icons, because I wanted that nice black background and I wanted the gradient to be in the bright colour that matches with the icons. So you want to use widget background and primary if you want to use those. But what if I want to stand out from the background? I need that contrast. So if we look at this one, in this case I have a very simple widget. It's just some text and it's a nice little icon there, the heart with the My Widget. But if I've got a nice black screen, you can't see it, it is still there. I've just changed my wallpaper colour and my widget is gone, and that's a bit sad. I haven't changed any other colours, all I've changed is the background. If I do go and change those theme colours, I thought, okay, that might work. No, it's still there. You just can't see it. It's on black, or it's black on almost black. So what I want to do is every time the wallpaper changes, I want to see if I can update my, if I want to update my widget colours. So I can use Wallpaper Manager for that. So I get my wallpaper colours, and I want the system wallpaper, the ones on the home screen. I can have a state here that's use the dark colour on the wallpaper, just a boolean. I've got a function here called get use dark colour on wallpaper, wonderfully named. I'll talk about that, but let's assume we get a value from that, and then we can say that state. We can also then listen in on the wallpaper changes, because this part at the top, that would only work the first time I added the widget, not if the user has a wallpaper that changes periodically, or if they just happen to change it daily if they feel like it. So I need to have a disposable effect. This has got a on colours change listener. So every time the wallpaper colours change, it will call this function. And these colours are drawn by the operating system from the wallpaper. So the operating system will look at the wallpaper, pick out the primary, pick out the secondary, pick out the tertiary, and we'll use those. So even though my example before that had the black most wallpaper, it also had some blue in there and some sort of grey, it would pick black as the primary colour. If you've got a wallpaper that has a whole bunch of different colours, well, you might get a bit unlucky with which one it picks. But we let the operating system do that. If you really want to, you can get the bitmap and do it yourself and stuff here, but I didn't go to that effort. So I'm going to get the colours and the type of wallpaper. So I'm going to listen on this, and I'm going to make sure I remove this when it's disposed as well. So let's talk about this function. I need to determine which colour to use. So I'm passing in my wallpaper colours and my type. In this case, all I care about is the flag system. If I don't get any colours from the system, that's okay, I won't do anything about it. And then we have another check for if the version code is above S, because we get a few little advantages if we do. We can look at colour hints. And we're just doing a comparison here to see if they support dark text. And this is really helpful because it's just saying, do these colours support dark text? And this is what controls the colour of the text that's underneath all the app icons. So if we want to match those, because they're usually pretty good, they're either dark or light depending on the background, they follow this flag. So we want to choose which one, and we can, again, let the operating system decide. We also have this supports dark theme. I haven't looked into this terribly much, but it will give you a value on whether a dark theme is more preferred. But if our device is a little bit older and we don't have access to this fancy new thing, we can do a bit of maths. I'm not going to go deeply into it, but essentially we go grab the primary colour. We need to get it into the HSV version, which is a little bit tricky. And then I've got this colour is a dark advanced. You can also look at the secondary or tertiary colours as well if you want to. I got this function off Stack Overflow. I didn't do this myself. You can also ask Gemini to do it for you as well. Look, there's some AI. And so we can make sure that we go grab let somebody else do the maths for you. And as long as you get a value, that's okay. But essentially, you want to take a look at that colour and say, is dark or light better on this colour? So now, my widget stands out from the background, whether I've got the light colour background or the dark colour. You can see it and it looks really good. And as you can see, it matches what the app icon names are. So now we've covered theming, we've covered UI, covered making widgets work, and data and updating. Pretty much the end. That was like easy and quick, right? Here's a bunch of useful links. Again, I will show a QR code in a moment if you want to jump to my website where these are all there as well. Stuff on Jetpack Glance, view-based widgets, samples. The samples are really hit and miss. They like step over a bunch of things. So it makes it a bit annoying because they make a lot of assumptions and, yeah, kind of frustrating. My colleague that had the idea with this app, he made one for macOS with the same idea. Feel free to go grab that. My app is now live, so go grab that. I'm also writing some blog posts on this, and they're coming soon. Slides and links on this if you want to scan this. I don't know if we have time for questions, but...
Not really at the moment.
Nope.
We'll take one question, if anyone's got one question.
Okay.
quick question. There you are.
Thank you. My question is, what are the ways, if there is any, to show the data which is behind the user authentication?
Behind the user authentication. So you'd need something that like your authentication would have to have like some sort of expiry. So you've got a token that you can keep using. So if you have that token, then you could keep using that to fetch the new data. But if you need to log in every single time, well, that's not going to work. So it depends how you construct your authentication. But you've got access to all that information. I glossed over it a little bit, but you can use your regular repositories, you can use your regular view models, everything else that you might have, other data sources. You've got access to the rest of your app. Just make sure you've got dependency injection to make it easy to pull in. Cool, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Katie, for that amazing session. Widgets are indeed hot. Let's give another big round of applause for Katie Barnett. Thank you so much.